Okay, welcome everybody to this edition of Zohar, and thank you everyone for bearing with the various time changes to the schedule. Just while it had to flip a bit, I didn't want to not learn just because it varied at the beginning. But so we'll meet at this time this week. Obviously, here we are, and then if it works for most people on the call, we'll switch to a noon meeting time beginning in a couple of weeks. There's a few weeks I can't meet on Wednesdays in between. We're dealing with a very special set of teachings today. And those teachings relate to Chidushei Torah, insights of Torah. What happens in the mystical realms when we study Torah? And as is often the case, one can't help but feel as though the Zohar is being self-reflective. After all, we're studying the Zohar, and the highest kind of mystical elevation will be reserved for those people that study Kabbalah in the Zohar's treatment of it. So obviously, there's a self-confidence in that move. Okay, we'll just get into it. I just wanted to kind of name the meta place we'll be in of studying about studying mysticism in the Zohar. I think this is where we left off. And I know some people missed last week. We're going to pick up with there, but the main story from last week will carry through, so it will bear some repeating. Well, maybe I'll just state the story very outside briefly so that you have the background. The story goes like this. Rabbi Shimon passes away, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and Rabbi Chia, maybe Rabbi Yossi, ascend to heaven after fasting to have a sort of revelation. Maybe they fast 2 periods of 40 days, mirroring Moses as he fasts for 2 periods of 40 days in order to experience divine revelation once, and then it fails, and then again. And eventually Rabbi Chia is granted an audience in heaven with Rabbi Shimon at his mystical academy. And in this place, Metatron is here Mari de Gadfim, the chief angel, the head of the angels, known in the Kabbalah as Metatron in the taxonomy of angels, is there. And he reveals this thing that happens that he heard Ma'achorei HaProzdor, from behind the curtain, that from heaven, from his perch in heaven, that every day the king in this metaphor yearns for the dough. God mourns the exile. God yearns for Israel, for the reparation of the world. And God becomes upset. And God's upset expresses itself in the form of tears of fire, which fall into the oceans. And these tears of fire become the water, the infinite waters of the ocean that Leviathan, the great ocean beast, drinks, is even made of, feeds on. And Leviathan, Leviathan, becomes the feast for tzaddikim, for the righteous in the worlds to come. But actually the way that the world to come, Alma Da'asi in the Zohar's language, the world that is coming, emerges, and it's fitting to call it Alma Da'ati, the world that is coming in this context, is because Leviathan drinks the water of the fiery tears of God's pain, which represent also the exile and the punishment. And then once the Leviathan drinks all the angry water, the land is dry. And so echoing back to Egypt and crossing on dry land, the righteous can cross on dry land and feast on the Leviathan. Some version of this is what the Zohar presents us as a myth. Really, it's a myth about it's a messianic myth, though, not a creation myth. And we said a lot last week about the commonality, this notion that the fear and the anger becomes also the fuel for redemption, and that they're one and the same in this passage. There was a lot said, but that's the basic, fairly complex foundational story that we'll be assuming knowledge of today. And so with that, I'm going to move on. I know you may have questions, whoever is going to leave that story there, and people can refer earlier to it. If you need or ask questions, please don't hesitate. Adahachi, while we're here, Shama Kalata Amar Panunatar, Panunatar Dahamaka Mashicha Ate Limitivta de Rabbi Shimon, begin the Chol Tzadikaya de Taman Reshi Mitivta, Inun Mitivte de Taman Reshimin Inun. Bechol Inun Chavrin di Bechol Mitivta Salki mi Mitivta de Hachel Mitivta de Rekia. Umashiach Ate Bechol Inun Mitivte, Vachati Moraita Mipumaihu de Rabbanan. Behishaita Ate Mashiach mit Ater min Reche Mitivte Beitran Ilain. In other words, meanwhile, everyone see where we are in the translation we're working with here? Meanwhile, Adahachi, Shamakala. Meanwhile, he heard a voice proclaiming, make way, for King Messiah is coming to the Academy of Rabbi Shimon. All the righteous present there are heads of academies, the heads of Rosh Metivta, Rosh Yeshiva, and those academies are designated there, and all the members of each academy ascend from academy here to the Academy of Heaven. The Messiah visits all those academies, setting his seal on the Torah, issuing from the mouths of the rabbis. At that moment, the Messiah arrived, adorned by the heads of the academies with celestial crowns. That's what we read in the passage. So we're just carrying on with the story here. So this is all going on. So Rabbi just placed it. Rabbi Chia is in heaven with Rabbi Shimon and Metatron during this mystical encounter between an earthling, Rabbi Chia, who's alive but has managed to ascend to the next world, and Rabbi Shimon, who has passed away and is in heaven in his heavenly academy, and Metatron, the chief angel who has descended and entered this gathering. Another character, a fourth character comes, you follow. So a new character enters stage right, let's just say. And that is the Messiah, just to complete this and make it more dramatic. Mashiach. And he comes, and there's this herald, make way for the Messiah is coming. You can envision the kind of march of it all. And the righteous there are Rosh Yeshiva, and they kind of ascend to the Academy of Heaven, and the Messiah visits these academies, setting his seal. So this is the key on the Torah. So the Messiah approves. So here the Messiah takes on a role. And of course, every time we say that the Mashiach, the Messiah, takes on a role or does a thing, we're giving definition to what it means to bring redemption, right? The Zohar is coloring that in a particular way, a particular shading. So here, what does he do? He sets his seal on the Torah, issuing from the mouths of the rabbis. In other words, he says, it's good. That's a good teaching. Or not. All right. But here it's just mentions the positive part. And when he does that, yeah. Okay. Now, just to complete the picture, it notes that the Rosh Yeshiva, the righteous who run academies here, that the Messiah endorses the teachings. They are they have these crowns, these heavenly crowns about them. Okay. Let's just carry on. We'll just work with this teaching and. Ba'ahushata kamo kol inun chavraya v'kam Rabbi Shimon v'havasalik nahore ad rum rakia Amar le Rabbi, Zaka ant deoraita salka bitlat mea veshivin nehorin. V'chol nehora nehora it parshat tashit mea utlesar ta'amin v'salkin v'stachiam b'nahrei afar simona dachya. V'kuchabrichu yuchatim oraita mimetivtach umimetivta dechizkiya melech Yehuda migometivta da'achia hashiloni. Ve'ana la'atena lemechtam mimetiftach, elamai degadvin atehacha, ta'yadana deloyeu go mitivta achriti ela b'mitiftach. Carry on with this story. At that moment of the chevraya, the friends, always referred to as the chevraya, the companions, arose, and Rabbi Shimon rises. They stand. His describes here as light radiating ad rum rakia. They translate that here, the vault of heaven, but it's really to the heights of the heavens, rum rakia. So Rabbi Shimon stands up and he's got a light, again echoing Moshe, whose face shines, right, Karen, or Panav. This light just shines up infinitely. And he says to him, the Messiah, I think, says to Rabbi Shimon, happy are you, or fortunate are you, Rabbi, for your Torah ascends in 370 lights. So the Messiah is describing the light that shines from Rabbi Shimon's face, and perhaps by extension Moshe's face, when his face shines with the light of Torah. And it's a specific number of lights, 370. And 370 signify, I've switched to the Sphirot chart, the 3 upper Sphirot and the 7 lower Sphirot, you see here, 370. Because of course, these 3, Keter, Chochmah, and Bina, which represent a form of divine thought, they're not just in addition to the kind of divine action, but divine thought colors divine action, is infused in it. And so these are elevated by a column to the hundreds column, where these are in the tens column. Does that make sense? This is a particular statement about the Sphirot, that this is like the hundreds column, and this is like the tens column. That's a way of thinking about it. 370 lights. So when we say that Rabbi Shimon's light is 370 lights elevating, what we're really saying is that Rabbi Shimon's Torah, his teaching, and this is an ideal for all of us then, is complete. It's total. It fully represents God in all of God's manifestation with balance and equilibrium and totality. So Rabbi Shimon has a kind of complete Torah. Sorry, I don't know how we jumped some pages there. Okay. Each and every light refracting into 613 senses. So there are 370 lights. Every light represents some other aspect of the Sphirot, and they refract. Now, let's just work with this here. Refracting means the light, this is a metaphor, the light it splits into different colors, into 613 colors, or here senses, the chush. So what about it? So it's perceptible, right? Because the light, when it's white light, is not perceptible in its individuation, but here when it splits, it can be perceived in different ways. So these lights that Rabbi Shimon has, these sort of white lights, each split into 613. Of course, Taryag, the number of the mitzvot. So there's a sense in which each mitzvah has an element of every different manifestation of the light of the Sphirot. In other words, the mitzvot are ways of seeing the light of God. So this is a definition of mitzvot. It's one definition of mitzvot, a way to perceive God's light. God's light is unseeable. You can't see it. It's like UV light. But you can see them in mitzvot. You can see 370 lights in each mitzvah. The 370 lights each split into 613. So the mitzvot are colored with a bit of all of these lights. Ascending and bathing in rivers of pure balsam. So these lights go up and they bathe in rivers of balsam. This references a midrashic tradition. It's in the Talmud, it's in other places about the righteous and rivers of balsam in the worlds to come. Okay. The Blessed Holy One sets his seal on the Torah of your academy and the academy of Chizkiah, king of Judah, and the academy of Achia Hashiloni, Achia of Shiloh. A word about this. So, particularly in this mystical tradition, Chizkiah, the great repentant king of Judah, who ushers in this period of reform and repentance, is perceived of as being a mystical giant, as he is in every stripe of Jewish thought, right? Chizkiah, who is an important religious figure. I think here we're talking about a messianic tradition, and so there's this notion of Chizkiyahu bringing a kind of national reform or repentance that serves as a prelude to a national reform or repentance, which might occur at the end of days, a Chizkiyahu-like period. And Achia Hashiloni, people may know Achia. Is anyone familiar with the biblical figure Achia Hashiloni? So he is Rabbi Confer.
Someone in the David story, but I can't put my finger on it right now, right?
Yeah. So he's in the David Solomon stories. Him probably known for, he tells Yeravam, the king, he's the prophet who says that the kingdom will split, that the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel will be. And so I'm going to rename him the prophet of doom, although Jeremiah could fairly be that. But he's in the story in a sense because, the exile starts internally in a certain sense with the civil war of the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Yehudah. And so Achia is, Chizkiyahu brings national reform. Achia is it prophesies about the coming split. And he's also in the mystical literature said to be the prophetic teacher of Eliyahu Hanavi. He's the one that taught Eliyahu his prophecy skills, which is a pretty big credential because Eliyahu is the one who announces the coming of the Messiah. So here you're going to like the master's master, as it were. So what's the point? There's only three, what are we saying here? Yeah, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have this teaching that his seal, his chotam is emet, it's true. And the Messiah says that there are only three academies that the Messiah gives license to a bunch of academies, but God himself only notes that three academies are, ultimate academies. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Chizkiyahu, the king of Yehudah, and Achia Hashiloni. And the Messiah says, I have not come to set my seal on what issues from your academy. I think the subtext here is because I don't need to. God did, right? Like you don't need my license, I, the Messiah, because God himself has approved of your teaching, Rabbi Shimon. So why am I here? Why am I the Messiah? If my job as Messiah is to go around to different teachers and say, you're right, it's a good teaching. I don't need to do that too because God already did. Why am I here? I'm here because my Degadfin, Metatron is here. And I want to know what Metatron has to say. I heard the head angel was here. And I, the Messiah, am curious to learn. Any comments or questions to this point in the story?
Just coming back to the 370 lights representing all of the Sfirot. Isn't there a mystical tradition that the Torah itself is not really stories, but it's really the name of God encoded? So in other words, the Torah itself is God's essence. And maybe that's what this has behind it as well, that somehow Rabbi Shimon has dug down to the essence of Torah, which is really the name of God, the Sfirot of God, the essence of God.
Yeah, and there probably is a sense here of ner mitzvah v'torah or, that a mitzvah is the candle and the Torah is the light. Yes, but Rabbi Shimon has the same way that Abraham observed the Torah in the Zoharic sense, that the Zohar understands that he didn't observe the physical things, but he was able to ascertain the spiritual level of the mitzvot. In this way, Rabbi Shimon's Torah is replete with the full essence of God as broken down. Yeah. Okay. So Metatron is, yeah. Sure.
Oh, sorry. I just was kind of trying to connect this because it was like, so if I get this right, then Ahia was the prophet that at the time of Jeroboam ben Nevat.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's interesting because it's almost like you have these two associations, Hezekiah being sort of like the ideal king, and Jeroboam is like the least. I'm reading some halakha from Rambam, and he mentions like there's like a halakha that you basically don't ostracize, you don't say anything against a leader or a king, unless he's acting like Jeroboam ben Nevat. Like he's like if someone's that bad as a leader, you kind of then you have to do something about him. But this is like from Hilchot Talmud Torah. It's like when you should say something against the leader. You should never say anything against the leader unless he's as bad as Jeroboam. So that's a long way of saying together. It's almost like you have these two ideal, polar opposite kind of figures here. I don't know what that means for this particular parak, but just it's interesting. These kind of the worst kind of king, and then someone who's associated with or someone who like the best king, and someone who's associated with the worst king, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I appreciate the observation.
I don't know that it amounts to anything. Just
no. It's certainly colors, the breath, breadth of what the Zohar is teaching here. Anyone else? We're always welcome for your comments, observations, and questions. V'ahi sha'ata sachli Rabbi Shimon ahu omad omimar de Gadfin. Kedain is da'aza Mashiach v'arim kalev is da'azu rekiin is da'aza yama rabba is da'aza livyatan v'chashiv amal hitapcha. Adachi chama Rabbi Chia l'ragloi de Rabbi Shimon amar manya ifhachi barnash levish madad dehahu ama amar le Rabbi Shimon da'yu Rabbi Chia nehiru devutina deoraita amar le yitkanash v'noi v'leven mitivta dilach. Amar Rabbi Shimon zimna yit yehivle. Yahabu le zimna v'nafak mitaman mizdaza v'zal gane noidimin. Izdaza Rabbi Chiyuvacha v'amar zakachu kaund tzadikaya behu amma v'zakachu kei devar yochai tezakalakach alektiv anchil ohavai yesh v'otzroteim amale. So then Rabbi Shimon told him the oath. Told him the oath that the master of wings had sworn. And the oath that the master of swings had sworn, the Shavua that Mar de Godfin, Metatron, had sworn, is the story with the king and the doe. The king every day spends some time mourning and crying over the doe that is exiled, that is Israel in exile, the world unrepaired, Shekhinah unredeemed, and that God has these tears of anger, of fire, of sadness, which fill the waters, which feed the Leviathan. That is the oath, the story I told you in the beginning. It's the oath from last week. So Rabbi Shimon tells, and Metatron is the one that shared that story. So So the Messiah comes to learn what Metatron has to say, and Rabbi Shimon acts as the spokesperson, the attorney for Metatron, and tells the Messiah what Metatron taught. It's interesting here, Rabbi Shimon is placed in a position of as being a superior to the Messiah in a certain sense, in the posture of the story. The Messiah began trembling, he's da'aza, like an earthquake, and cried aloud. The heavens trembled, the vast ocean trembled, Leviathan trembled, right? Leviathan is in this. Now the things in the story are trembling just by being told in the story. It's like your ears are burning, so you're trembling. Here is the Zohar's version of it, because as the story is told, the very foundation of the thing shakes. And the world verged itapcha. The world was almost reversed. Creation was almost overturned. In other words, so powerful is the recitation of this story about the world that it almost, the self-knowledge of it almost blew it up. Just building the drama. At that moment, he noticed Rabbi Chia sitting at the feet of Rabbi Shimon. The Messiah sees the Rabbi Chia, who is, by the way, alive. He's the only character in this story who's still alive, is there. Said, who put a barnash here? Why is there a human here? What is the human doing here? Clothed in the garb of that world, Amadat, the physical. He's wearing clothes in the mall. What is Rabbi Chia doing here? This holy moment, the world is almost great. There's a person intruding. There's a humor to this. I think it's sometimes hard to pick up on the humor in the Zohar, but they were familiar with this sort of narrative story style, I've got to believe. And this seems to me to be, you imagine this great moment where the world might destroy itself. It's like a Noach repeat in the mystical version. And then there's like an intruder, right? It's okay. So that's just how I perceive it. I think it's how it's to be read. So Rabbi Shimon says, no, that's Rabbi Chia. Butina of the Oraita, is the radiance of the lamp of the Torah. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is Butina Kadisha, the holy lamp, and this is the Butina de Oraita, I think was the official. He's like the lamp of the Torah. He's not just a person; he's Rabbi Chia. So the Messiah says, then he should be let him be killed together with his sons, so that they become members of your academy. If he's so holy, let's put him here. He can learn with you if you love him so much, Rabbi Shimon. The Messiah here is, and this is something that happens in the Zohar, there's this flux between messianic and demonic, devilish. There's a sort of cruelty to this going on, right? The Messiah says, it's kind of like, if he's so holy, why don't you learn with him? Let's end his life so he can study with you. This also speaks to the mystical tension, that is the physicality of this world, on the one hand, is the only place you live, and viewed very positively, but in an ascetic mystic environment, it's also a hindrance to certain insight and forms of perception. You have to do the dishes, contend with bodily pain, fear and anxiety, hunger, lust, and all the rest, right? And so there's a sense in which it's viewed as negative. And this is bringing the tension out in a story. But Rabbi Shimon knows this well, right? I mean, he's retreated to the cave. He's not like, he's not, the Baal Shem Tov seeking to uplift, and see the beauty. He's fine going to the cave. So Rabbi Shimon says, no, don't kill him. Let him be granted time. Give him some time. Give him some time. He doesn't need to be here now. Sort of a nod, as it were, if not in technical terms, then just in the narrative, to the importance of life. Right? Don't take him for that. It's not worth it to die just to learn with me. Give him more time. He'll get there also. Everyone, eventually it ends. So time was granted to him. He emerged trembling, his eyes streaming with tears. His life was just put on trial with a conversation, right? Quivering, he cried, happy is the share of the righteous in that world. And happy is the chelek of Bar Yochai, the son of Yochai, who, and Bar Yochai is a common appellation for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar, who has attained this, who's reached this place. I mean, he's out dueling the Messiah, and the chief of the angels is coming to reveal the most lofty secrets to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And then he quotes this verse from Mishlei, from Proverbs, kind of saying that it refers to Rabbi Shimon. We'll just, Lahanchil ohavai yesh, ve'osroteam amalei. Yeah, they. Yes, so Lahanchil ohavai yesh. So I make cause those that love me, my lovers, ohavai. Lahanchil, to have a nachala, a heritage, to inherit, an inheritance, yesh. Lahanchil ohavai yesh, something. Those that love me should inherit something, should, like they're written in the will. They get something. V'otzrotem amalei, I will fill their storehouses. The Matt translation, just read it. So that I may endow those who love me with substance and fill their treasuries. Rabbi Shimon is someone that loves God, so v'anchil ohavai yesh, with substance. Amalei otzroteim, I'll fill his treasury. It's like Rabbi Shimon's got. I really think the mashal, this is Mishlei, is to like receiving a large inheritance at the end of your life. So the idea is that Rabbi Shimon was given an extremely rich bequest of spiritual treasure from God, and that's, he's saying, like, who gets the huge bequest? Who's the favorite child that gets the huge bequest from God? And the answer is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the one named in the will. Okay. Any questions about this? Kind of concludes this story, so we're going to move on to the next section. But I wanted to kind of at least reach the conclusion point of the story and see if anyone had any comments, questions, or observations about this story. Again, the story of Rabbi Chia and Metatron and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the Messiah all meet in like heaven, and Metatron reveals the secret to some of them about God yearning, being crushed by the exile, and that pain being the source of the redemption over time. The pain of suffering is the source of the redemption. That's really the teaching. What's the great teaching? The great teaching is that the pain of suffering is the fuel for is the water that it quenches, eventually becomes part of the redemptive process, which is a powerful spiritual teaching, though not unique to this. And then there's this whole thing about Rabbi Chia living and not, and kind of the drama of the story, the way it's staged. Any?
Yeah.
Karen? Yeah.
Well, I've been thinking about what you said about Rabbi Chia being sort of the intruder, and maybe in a comic sense, but also I'm thinking maybe in a necessary sense, like if he weren't there, then this earthquake might indeed sort of explode the entire situation. So that maybe his being in that world, which is to say on earth, and being the radiance of Torah in the world, is a sort of anchor for preventing the trembling from taking over.
Interesting. It's interesting because this trembling, which threatens to destroy the world, so that's the other part, right? When the teaching is revealed, the world hangs in the balance and is almost destroyed just by the revealing of this teaching. And there's, which is a teaching about exile and pain. And what about that, causes the world to nearly self-destruct, causes it to, and there's this sense also of like this lofty learning that's unmoored from the actual thing that's happening. You kind of need to like come down from it a little. Like there's a need for some earthliness to it, right? Like pain is very, the way pain is something about the nature of pain. Here, speaking of the exile, I think pain is a fair emotive substitute for when they talk about the pain of the exile. The nature of pain, and they may be saying a teaching about this, is to kind of cause people to be kind of focused on the self and not, when you're in pain, you're not focused on, like you're focused on the feeling of the pain in you. So there's something about pain which is very individualistic. You go like you're focused on yourself when you're in pain, or at least in, right, aninut being the most classic Jewish pain of grief, the immediate grief of the loss of a relative is called aninut, right? And that may come from this idea of being obsessed with one's, like the grief is so overbearing that one is ani, one is only the pain. That's a nature of grief. And so there's a sense in which actually a little bit of like the selfishness of pain, which is inherent to pain, actually like kills the dangerous spiritual transcendence, which is occurring at such a lofty level. You kind of need to like take a cool shower and calm it down, as it were, with a human. But yeah, that's a great point. Rabbi Yehuda isn't just like, hey, an intruder, but it's also like that distraction is what stops the earth from being destroyed.
And I think that him being the emblem of radiance of Torah in the world is, when I hear that, I think about him creating the conduit between the divine and the earthly realms, you know, that being the lamp of Torah in the world is maybe performing the mitzvot that give access to all of those lights. You know, it's making the connection. It sounds to me like Rabbi Chia is making all the connections.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that.
Can I just ask too, this interesting tract, I guess this tract of questioning is me just thinking in terms of the last couple of weeks of Parshiot. I mean, the expulsion from Eden and then the incident with the Tower of Babel, those were both kind of predicated on the idea that humans had like this potentiality to like kind of somehow overtake the divine, and kind of compete with the divine in some way. Like if humans can know, it's going to be, if they've eaten and they know good and evil, in no time they're going to be, you know, kind of in control of us somehow. I don't know, something about like there's some sort of problem with humans kind of entering and getting too much divine knowledge, and that's why they're expelled from Eden and then Babel is destroyed. So I wonder if that idea is present here as well and kind of reflected in this conversation.
Okay. Also, right, like Yodei Tov, right? Yodei Tovara are going to become like God, you know, knowing too much. Rabbi Shimon is on the precipice of that Adam-like place of danger. Interesting. He's in the garden, and actually, it's funny because it starts with maybe you last week in the Garden of Eden. That's where they note this story is occurring. I didn't really think about that resonance. So, like, here we are in the Garden of Eden with great spiritual knowledge. And then it becomes so fraught that things might become, and we're talking about exile and expulsion. So maybe you do see an echo here of that story. You see an echo certainly of the splitting of the sea, and also an echo of Moshe's revelation. Rabbi Chia fasts to get into this place in the first place for 2 periods of 40 days. And I didn't think, but it's true. There's an echo of the Eden story as well. Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Gracious, Rabbi Shimon Patach. So this Rabbi Shimon started teaching the Torah this way. When it got to Bereshis, we're in the Hakdama to Bereshis, and we're finally Rabbi Shimon is teaching the first word. Now, this has happened before, and we had Barashit. He created 6. He created this year. You know, we've done this, but it happens again. So Va'asim Dvarai Beficha. It quotes from Yeshayahu, and Yeshayahu, interestingly, is the Haftarah for Parshas Bereshis. Is from Yeshayahu, not far from where this is, I think. I don't know if someone can check that. I should have done more homework on that. But V'asim dvarai b'ficha, I will put my word in your mouth. So we're going to focus on v'asim. I, God, will place dvarai. I will place my word in your mouth. This is Torah. I will place my word in your mouth is studying Torah, is God's words. But whose words are they, really? Are they our words or God's words? Begin to kucha brichu tzayit lekon di'inun demitaske be'oraita v'chol mila de'tchadash be'oraita al yadat ehud yishtato be'oraita avid rikia chada. Keep going. Tananga he shouted to Mila de'oraita chad shats mi pume devarnasha he mila salkavit adetat kame de kucha brichu natila he mila v'nashikla. V'atarla b'shivin itrin glifinu mechaketan. Umila dechachmata di'itchadsha, salka v'yatzva aresha d'tzadik chai almin. V'tas mitan v'shata b'shivin elef almin, uslikat l'gabe atik yomin, v'chol mila da'atik yomin milin dechachmata inun berazin stimen ilayin. Rabbi Shimon opened, Patach, I have put my words in your mouth. How vital is it for a human being to engage in Torah study of Torah day and night? For the Blessed Holy One listens to the voice of those who occupy themselves with Torah, and with every word innovated in Torah by one engaged in Torah, he fashions one heaven. So every time you say a new word, a word that's itchadshat, that's innovated, it's a chidush. So it's not just an old Torah, but it's chidush. Here, I do get the sense that chidush means something new, but chidush also could be an old word of Torah said in a new way or with new feeling, meaning currently, presently, fully occupied. So there's a sense in which chidush here means a kind of refreshed Torah, which will become important in the teaching, the kind of renewal of things. So God listens is the first thing that happens to those that study Torah day and night and kind of refresh. And he makes a heaven for every word that's innovated, for every, I don't know if word is right, but for everything that's innovated, there's a heaven. We have learned the moment a new word of Torah originates from the mouth of a human being, and it's funny, Tanan, it's like quoting a Mishnah. It's like a Gemara now. As we learned in a Mishnah, there's no such Mishnah. The moment a new word of Torah originates from the mouth of a human being, the word ascends and prevents herself before the Blessed Holy One. Here, when we're saying that, there's a movement happening in this periodic chart. A word of Torah is down here in Malchut in the world. This is Torah as we do it. And it ascends to Tiferet. Kutsha Brichu, Kadosh Baruch Hu, the blessed Holy One, the Holy One, blessed be He, however you want to say it. Kadosh Baruch Hu is really kind of these six. Chesed, Gvur, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, anchored by Tiferet. It's referring to God, all of these lower six, Sfirot, represented by the letter Vav, Gematria 6, the third letter of God's name, Yod He Vav He. So it's all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu means Tiferet, but it doesn't mean just the sphere of Tiferet. It means the sphere of Tiferet kind of holistically, including all the branches that it were of loving kindness on the one hand, but being firm and tough on the other, and the balance between those two. Of netzach, of kind of long-term thinking and correcting and changing and persevering and struggling on the one hand, and hod, of mindful appreciation and present awareness and gratitude on the other. The balance of all of these countervailing divine spiritual forces in our lives, of kindness and firmness, of wanting to change and repair and strive and wanting to be present and mindful, all of them and all that is accompanied in all of those things, but I'm summarizing, vast books have been written on all of these subjects, right? And then the balance of it all. So the word of Torah ascends to that place. Okay. Who lifts that word? So God lifts the word up, kisses her, Nashikle, God kisses the word of Torah. This is a very anthropomorphic description. That God takes the word of Torah and kisses it, and adorns her with 70 crowns engraved and inscribed. So, and what are the crowns of the word of Torah? Of course, the crowns are maybe the lower 7 sirot, but also there's a sense in which 70 is kind of completion, right? The word of Torah is Shivim Panim La Torah, all the faces of Torah, the crowns of God. It all kind of melds. That's for Torah. That's a Devar Torah. But there's something higher than a Devar Torah, and that's a Devar Chochmata, something of Chochma. Chochma, wisdom, which is really Kabbalah, Chochmata Emet, an innovated word of wisdom. So it's all Chidush, it's all new. But if you say a new Devar Torah, like a new Gemara or a new Pshat in the Chumash or a new teaching in life, that's one thing. But a new mystical teaching of Chochma, that has a different kind of divine path. What does it do? It ascends and settles on the head of Tzaddik, righteous one, vitality of the worlds, Chei Almin. So Chei Almin, actually, I know Rabbi Confer, and we'll share it, is adding terms that we find in the Zohar that refers to Sfirot that aren't listed in the terms here. So Chei Almin is going to be one of them, if you're updating the chart to include other things. Chei Almin is Chei Ha'olamim in Hebrew, which is in the prayer a lot, the giver of life of the worlds. A side pet peeve is that people often mispronounce this in the davening at the end of Yishtabach, the end of the Psukei D'Zimra. People say Chei as if it's a Chai, and then they say Ha'olamim. It's Chei Ha'olamim, the life giver of the worlds. It's a Hifil grammatical formulation, Chei Almin in Aramaic. So here, Yesod becomes the place where all of the spiritual energy of above is collected and poised to give life into the world, to cause being to fully manifest. It's a place of great potential energy, of full potential energy. And so the word of Torah here ascends to Yesod, to Chei Almin, this place where all of the spiritual energy is gathered. And then it does a radical kind of thing. From there, it flies and soars through 70,000 worlds to the ancient, ascending to the Ancient of Days. So rather than just going up to Tiferet, like a Devar Torah, it goes to Atik Yomin, the Ancient of Days, which is a way of talking about Keter, the Ancient of Days, God's oldest discernible moment, old like age. The oldest God of gods is God before, that question kids think about when they're bored late at night. Like, what was there before there was anything? That one. So God before there was anything. It ascends to pre-creation. It leaves, that's a big thing to say. It goes to a place that's so high, it's out of this world, literally. It's out of any world. It's out of worlds. It ascends to God himself. Through these heavens. All of the what do we say here? All the words of the Ancient of Days are words of wisdom, conveying supernal, concealed mysteries. Right, so they're mysteries because they're unknown to us. Sorry, we can never, I meant to go here. We can never know what's happening before there was anything. It's the place before human knowledge is before Chachma. Yes? So it ascends to pre-knowledge. Oh gosh. Before a world of differentiation, before even a world of language, a place of pre-language, there's something non-linguistic in these truths. Okay. So I think we're going to pause here. I feel like this is maybe a lot. Next time when we come, unless people want to go on, but next time we're going to talk about the descent of this Torah. This Torah goes on like a ladder journey. So it goes here and then it shoots up 70,000, maybe that's like, and it gets all the way to Keter. It gets to Erech Anpin. It gets to a place of nothingness for anything. I just want to conclude by having a little discussion about what does it mean that this word of mystical Torah ascends, you know, beyond existence. Or is it, or do people just want to sit with that?
Well, is it that it's the word of mystical Torah that's ascending, or it sounds like it's the word I was hearing in it was it's when you're studying Torah and thinking about it and trying to come up with fresh interpretations, whether it's your own digestion of the old ideas or even an innovative interpretation, that's what's going up. It's the human generation of.
It is the human generation of the Chidush. So this is the great paradox, right? So the human generation of the Chidush ascends to a place even before humans were a thought, right? There's something paradoxical about this teaching, that humans generate some new insight into the Torah that is so lofty that it ascends to God before God could even contemplate creating the world, before the Torah we generate could ascend to a thing that we couldn't even understand, can ascend to a place we can't fathom. We, through mystical insights, can know things that are unknowable. That's kind of the claim.
It doesn't make me think about knowing,
or can touch on it,
or contribute to it, which is to say that there's this really weird time loop going on where you're contributing to the beginning of the world, even though you've come later.
Right. That's a good way of saying it. You're contributing to, and you're maybe refreshing. There's something about the Chidush, which there's a sense, I think, in this teaching, which this somehow refreshes the continuity of the world. Like it brightens the world as it is a notch in doing this. I just wanted to note the pro-Chidush posture of the Zohar. The Zohar is very into new insight. It's aware that it itself is a new insight of Torah, and it, rather than saying like you shouldn't say anything new, ein kol chadash tachat hashamash, nothing new under the sun, a new word of Torah is great, and a new mystical insight is greater than great. God loves chidushim. God loves chidushim. He kisses them.
I don't know how many people got, this come around of a piece that was in the forward last week about Amy Barrett could learn something from the Talmud. And the position of the writer in the forward was, of course, that all Talmudic discussion takes the Torah and creates something new. And the writer was obviously against the originalist position of Amy Barrett. So I'm wondering, and a couple of people asked me, what do you think about that article in the forward? I don't know if you got it, Rabbi, coming around with a question. What do you think about it? So is this, to put it in, I guess, the forward Supreme Court language, is the Zohar kind of anti-originalist? In other words, no, Moshe didn't get all of Torah on Sinai. It's open to chidushim in every generation.
I think, though, the question of originalism is, to be fair, a much more complex one than that. For this, I recommend everyone checking out Jack Rakove's book, Original Meanings, which is the best piece of scholarship on originalism I know. It's a great book. But the originalist claim is a textualist one, that it must be linked to something in the text. And so actually, it's not that new things can never emerge. Of course, new applications, insights, and textures are revealed at any moment. The question is, how necessary is it to be linked to the meaning of the words in the text? And so I think the Zohar is neutral on that question, to be fair, in the sense that I do think that, but they're always hanging it on a pasuk. They were never claiming it, right? And that's the thing about the insight, right? It's always claimed to be the meaning. It's a claim about the meaning. It could be a expansive claim about the meaning or a new claim about the meaning, but it's still a claim about the meaning. And so actually, I think it's maybe this is a more complex answer than you wanted, Rabbi Comfort, but my personal opinion,
no, I
though not
forgot
popular,
for a
perhaps.
moment that you're a lawyer and you know all of that literature. And I'm just...
Yeah, no, No, so
Yeah.
I think that some of the ways that people talk about kind of textualist or originalist approaches are which have there are great critiques to have of them, and that's well and good. But I think actually Judaism is much more textualist. It's quite textualist. In fact, we're obsessed with the text, tagine and letters, and now people derive all kinds of innovative interpretations from the text, and you could claim, like the Rambam seems to, in his Hakdama to the Mishnah Torah, that it's a game. It's a game of hermeneutics, right? The Rambam says at one place that when they say it's a halacha and they derive it from a pasuk in the Gemara, they're not really deriving it. They know the law because they know the law, and they're just tricking you into thinking it's authentic by linking it to a pasuk, but it's fake. The Rambam says. Maybe Mark Herman, an academic, just published a paper disputing the traditional interpretation of the Rambam. People can check that out if they want. But that's what the Rambam seems to say. But even still, even for the Rambam who thinks it's like a game, where you try and say something and you find your proof text after, but they still play the game, that no one doesn't play the game. And for all the other, thinkers, it's not a game. It's just a real discussion about the weight and meaning of the text, even as Rabbi Akiva, of course, is teaching and Moshe doesn't recognize it as his own teaching, right? And it says, what is this in this famous Talmudic passage? And they say, oh, it's halacha Moshe miSinai. You said it. I did. So one can imagine that, but it's still linked. I don't know. So the Zohar is more antinomian than the Talmud, though. It is fair to say that to whatever extent the Talmud is not afraid of insight and new whatever, the Zohar is even more unafraid of boldness. And I do think it's fair to say that the Zohar's posture, and this I would agree with Rabbi Confer, is not one of being beholden to the past, although it claims to be a revelation of Kabbalah, of revealed wisdom, right? Not of created insight, but its claim is, and even to the extent that the Zohar is, and maybe this will be my final comment about it, new, like it appears in this vein in a particular time, every teaching is in the name of a Tana, however authentically old that is or isn't. There's no teaching that isn't put in the voice, name, and character of a specific Tana. And even here, when Midrashim are reworked, they're reworked with the same thematic elements as prior. Like it works off of existing Midrashim and transforms them. So I don't know what to say about all that and how that conforms to American jurisprudence, but I guess what I'll say is the Zohar is primarily a work of mythology. It's interested in the stories, not the laws. And to the extent that there are laws, those laws become easels of meaning or canvases of meaning. But the Zohar is interested in overlaying the law, like famously, right? It says that a mitzvah tzadta is like a connection. Reinterprets or eitzah is the strongest language, advice. I don't know. I don't know if I've answered your question. I've said too much, but I think Zohar and originalism are like apples and oranges.
Okay.
Or apples and koalas. They're like different things. And with that, I will conclude, I think, this class. Next time, the descent of the Torah. Like the chidush, the mystical. We did the ascent. It like worked from here, and it shoots up all the way to Keter. And Rabbi Shimon's teaching shoot up to this place, this primordial place, and then they come back down. So we're going to just pick up the ladder. Next week we're not meeting. The week after we're not meeting. I apologize. I just have conflicts for 2 weeks, but I appreciate your patience. In 3 weeks we will meet, and then we'll meet every week without much exception at noon. We'll continue this. So I thank everyone for studying today. And I hope this will enhance not just your understanding of the Zohar, but also this notion of redemption and enlightenment that comes from studying words of Torah. Like when you study Torah, this should transform the way you do it. Like, no, there's a light that's shooting out of these teachings and insights shoot light up to the heavens, right? And bring godliness into the world. That's Torah should have those qualities. If it's just a academic exercise, it's not Torah. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank
Be
you
well.
all.